was the voice that tore through the heavens and defined the archetype of the rock god, in its purest essence, the lament of a man chained to the Olympus he himself helped to build. What truly lies hidden behind the cascading golden mane, the bared chest, and the primal howl that echoed from the frantic urgency of communication breakdown to the epic grandeur of Kashmir. The story of Robert Anthony Plant, the minstrel from the English Black Country, is not merely a rock and roll biography. It is an epic of meteoric ascent and brutal, gut-wrenching falls, a journey of Dionysian excesses that masked a quiet, desperate search for redemption. And the secret he would most vehemently guard is not to be found in the tired clichés of trashed hotel rooms or the revolving door of groupies that form the mythological circus of Led Zeppelin. Those are merely the vulgar, disposable props of a well-staged theater of rebellion. No, the truth he would likely entomb in the deepest crypt of his soul is the chronicle of his own fracturing, the clinical anatomy of his pain. It is the story of the precise moment the persona was irrevocably shattered, and the man, stripped bare, raw, and vulnerable, was forced to stare into the abyss and, from its desolate depths, reconstruct not just a career, but the very essence of his being. To truly understand the fall, one must first comprehend the absurd, vertiginous, and unprecedented altitude of the flight. In the crepuscular light of the 1960s, amidst the fertile explosion of the British blues boom, Plant was a young, somewhat callow provincial singer. He was a sonic pilgrim, utterly possessed by the spectral laments of Delta bluesmen like Robert Johnson and Skip James, whose tales of crossroads and damnation felt more authentic than anything in his industrial Midlands surroundings. He was equally captivated by the guttural ferocity of Howlin' Wolf and the rustic harmonica-driven elegance of Sonny Boy Williamson. While many of his contemporaries, gifted musicians in their own right, were content to emulate their American idols with faithful precision, Plant's ambition was far more alchemical. He sought to assimilate these foundational elements and transmute them into something new, something volatile and uniquely his own. His voice, even then, was an instrument of raw, untamed power, a telluric force that had yet to be fully harnessed. He possessed the soaring range of a dramatic tenor, yet he wielded it with a bluesman's grit, demonstrating an almost supernatural ability to project notes into the stratosphere of his upper register. He did this using a full-throated belting technique that seemed to defy the limits of human physiology, a sound that carried in its timbre both the industrial soot of West Bromwich and the mystical dust of the Mississippi Delta. When Jimmy Page, the visionary sonic architect, studio magician, and recent émigré from the fractured Yardbirds, stumbled upon Plant performing in an obscure teacher's college, he experienced an epiphany. Page, who had a clear and monumental sound echoing in his mind, a fusion of acoustic delicacy and electric brutality he called light and shade, didn't just see a promising vocalist. He saw the living, breathing incarnation of that sound. He saw a force of nature, a mesmerizing paradox of masculine fury and feminine delicacy. Here was the final, indispensable piece of his grand sonic puzzle. United with the tectonic pulse and polyrhythmic genius of John Bonham, and the quiet, multi-talented backbone of John Paul Jones, who provided the harmonic, melodic, and rhythmic anchor, they didn't just form a band, they forged a monolith. Led Zeppelin was less a musical group and more a geological event, an impact force that permanently rearranged the landscape of popular music. And Robert Plant, almost overnight, was transformed from a wandering blues acolyte into its vocal epicenter. He became the Golden God, a moniker that perfectly encapsulated his shamanic stage presence, his fluid androgyny, and his uncanny resemblance to a Nordic deity torn from the pages of myth and brought to life under the stage lights. Plant's public persona was meticulously, if not always consciously, constructed upon this larger-than-life image. It was a potent fusion of unbridled eroticism and an ethereal, almost scholarly mysticism. On stage, he was the bard, the high priest, the storyteller guiding a rapt audience through fantastical lands of ice and snow, through epic battles and intimate encounters with the occult. His lyrics, which initially drew heavily from the blues tradition, often controversially borrowing entire verses, a practice that would later lead to legal disputes, rapidly evolved into a unique and uncharted territory. They became deeply imbued with the high fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien, the ancient folklore of the Celtic fringes, and a vague yet powerful strain of Eastern mysticism. These lyrical tapestries served as the script for the collective fantasy that was a Led Zeppelin concert. In purely technical terms, his vocal performance during the band's imperial phase was a breathtaking display of power and nuanced control. He had an innate mastery of blues phrasing, stretching syllables, bending notes, and playing with time, rubato, in a way that owed as much to Howlin' Wolf's raw expressiveness as it did to the precision of classical singing. His ability to shift in a heartbeat from a tension-laden whisper to a full-throated cathartic scream that sliced through the dense sonic wall of Page's guitar was a masterclass in both micro and macro dynamics. He expertly utilized his mixed voice, creating a powerful synergy between the thyroretinoid, chest voice, and cricothyroid, head voice muscles, to achieve crystalline high notes that sounded simultaneously powerful and ethereal, a sound that became his indelible signature. The famous mournful wail in Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, with its heart-stopping dramatic crescendo, or the orgasmic interplay of moans and fragmented phrases in Whole Lotta Love, were not merely examples of singing. They were acts of pure sonic catharsis, the audible manifestation of an unbridled artistic libido, and a surprisingly profound vulnerability. He was the living conduit through which the band's primordial energy became both human and, paradoxically, superhuman. His private life during this dizzying ascent was a distorted, funhouse mirror reflection of this public persona. Married in 1968 to Maureen Wilson, a stabilizing anchor to his pre-fame past, Plant began to live a dangerously dissociated existence. There was Robert, the quiet family man who sought refuge at Jennings Farm, his pastoral sanctuary in the remote hills of Wales, a place to reconnect with the earth, his children, and something resembling reality. And then there was Percy, the hedonistic rock god, a nickname he acquired on the road, who presided over the rituals of excess that became the enduring and often dark legend of the band's tours. Hedonism wasn't just tolerated, it was the prevailing gospel. Life on the road, particularly in the sprawling, temptation-filled landscape of the United States, was a surreal blur of private jets, the infamous Starship, presidential suites, rivers of alcohol, mountains of drugs, and a seemingly infinite supply of admirers. It was an ecosystem perfectly engineered to inflate the ego to monstrous proportions while systematically eroding the soul, and it was wholly incompatible with the maintenance of a conventional family life. In much later, more reflective interviews, Plant would openly admit to the strain of this duality and the corrosive guilt that haunted him, the gnawing sense that while he was immersed in the hermetically sealed, surreal world of Led Zeppelin, he had effectively abandoned his family. This brutal, ever-present tension between the man and the myth, between the pastoral peace of Jennings Farm and the debauched heaven of a private jet, was the first and perhaps the most profound fissure in the glittering armor of the Golden God. Then, fate, like an implacable creditor with no interest in fame or fortune, arrived to collect its debt with exorbitant, cruel interest. The first major fracture, a seismic warning of the devastation to come, occurred in August of 1975. During what was meant to be a restorative holiday on the Greek island of Rhodes, Plant and his family were involved in a horrific car accident when the vehicle he was driving plunged off a cliff. He suffered a shattered ankle and a fractured elbow. Maureen's injuries were far more severe, including a fractured pelvis and multiple deep lacerations that left her in critical condition. Their children, Karak and Carmen, sustained minor physical injuries, but the psychological trauma was immense. The Golden God, for the first time in his adult life, was rendered painfully mortal, fragile, and utterly impotent. The carefully cultivated image of onstage invincibility dissolved under the sterile fluorescent lights of a Greek hospital room. The colossal world tour planned to follow was immediately canceled, and for a time, the very future of the band was cast into serious doubt. The subsequent recording of the album Presence, 1976, was a testament to this ordeal. Conducted in Munich, the sessions were fraught with tension and pain. Plant, confined to a wheelchair and often fogged by painkillers, channeled his physical agony and existential frustration into his performance. His voice, once a beacon of exultant power, was now tinged with a new, raw layer of suffering. Musically, the album mirrors this grim reality. It is a stark, austere, almost monochromatic record, stripped of the acoustic folk and multi-instrumental flourishes of previous works. It is dominated by Page's frantic, layered, and often desperate-sounding guitars, carrying an urgency that borders on panic. Plant's performance on Achilles' Last Stand, a labyrinthine 10-minute epic, stands as a monument to his resilience, but the pain is palpable in every strained syllable. The lyrics, which speak of a restless traveler yearning for home and contemplating his destiny, took on a tragic and deeply personal resonance. Even more revealing is the slow, grinding blues of T for One, a devastating portrait of loneliness on the road, where Plant's voice conveys a profound sense of isolation and despair. The fall from Olympus had begun, and the sickening sound of the impact was forever etched into the vinyl grooves of that album. But if the accident in Greece was the fracture, what transpired 2 years later was the annihilation. On July 26, 1977, while in the midst of another colossal, record-breaking American tour, Plant received a telephone call that shattered his universe. It was Maureen, her voice broken and incomprehensible on the other end of the line. Their 5-year-old son, Carrick Pendragon, had fallen suddenly ill with a stomach virus and died within hours. The news didn't just break him, it disintegrated him at an atomic level. The world of excess, the mythology, the music, the sold-out stadiums, the adulation, the platinum records, all of it instantly became meaningless cosmic debris in the face of the unimaginable black hole gravity of his loss. The tour was cancelled without a second thought. The band, as a functioning entity, effectively ceased to exist in that moment. Plant retreated from the world, a ghost in his own life, seeking a refuge that no longer existed. He seriously considered abandoning music forever, entertaining the idea of becoming a teacher at a Waldorf school, in a desperate search for a life of quiet simplicity and anonymity. He was haunted by a monstrous, crushing guilt, the torturous belief that his absence, his life on the road, the very karma of his hedonistic lifestyle, had somehow invited this tragedy upon his family. It was an impossible, soul-crushing weight to carry. This is the chapter of his life that Robert Plant would undoubtedly detest having dissected with the cold detachment of analysis, not because of the tragedy itself, which he has occasionally discussed with profound guarded reluctance, but because of the raw exposure of his absolute vulnerability and powerlessness that it revealed. The rock god, the lion of the stage, whose voice seemed capable of commanding the very elements, had been unable to protect his own child. The carefully constructed facade of power, control, and swaggering arrogance disintegrated completely, revealing a man utterly devastated by grief, a father suspended in an agony beyond words. The silence that followed was deep, profound, and terrifying. It was the unwavering, unconditional support of close friends, most notably the steadfast John Bonham, who refused to leave his side, that gradually coaxed him back from the precipice. Carrick's death also inflicted a terminal fracture within the internal dynamics of Led Zeppelin. Plant felt, whether fairly or not, that the response from some within the band and its vast entourage was cool and distant, more concerned with the financial implications of the cancelled tour than with his personal agony. This perception, that to some he was more a vital cog in a money-making machine than a grieving friend, created a deep, bitter division that, according to many biographers, never fully healed. The sacred brotherhood had been irremediably broken. When the band, with great reluctance, finally regrouped to record In Through the Outdoor in late 1978, it was a fundamentally changed entity. Plant's grief had irreversibly altered the internal power dynamic and, consequently, the musical direction. With Page battling his own demons and a growing heroin addiction, and Bonham sinking deeper into alcoholism, it was Plant and a newly assertive John Paul Jones who took the creative helm. The result is an album strikingly dominated by Jones's synthesizers and Plant's most introspective, direct and terrestrial lyrics. 2 songs in particular stand as visceral testaments to his pain and his attempts to process it. All My Love is a direct, almost achingly sincere and moving tribute to Kerouac. It is a song of pure paternal love, entirely stripped of mythological metaphor or rock and roll bravado. Its bright major key melody and Jones's prominent synthesizer arrangement made it a complete anomaly in the band's catalog, and a significant source of tension with Page, who reportedly found it too soft, a betrayal of Zeppelin's heavy blues-based essence. But for Plant, the song was a cathartic necessity, a musical epitaph, a public act of love. The album's final track, I'm Gonna Crawl, is an even more direct expression of his state of mind. A slow, tortured blues ballad, it features a vocal from Plant that reaches a level of raw, unvarnished emotion rarely heard before or since. There is no technical showboating. His singing is no longer the exultant cry of a god, but the desperate plea of a man on his knees, exploring the microtonalities of pain with a vibrato that seems to carry the weight of the world. It is the unadulterated sound of loss. The tragic, sordid death of John Bonham in September 1980 was the coup de grace for Led Zeppelin. The surviving members wisely and honorably decided that the band could not and should not continue without its irreplaceable drummer. For the world, it was the end of a monumental era, but for Plant, in a complex and profoundly bittersweet way, it was also a liberation. The dissolution of the band forced him to confront the existential question of who he was without the golden armor, without the monolithic mythological machine that had defined his entire adult life. His subsequent solo career became a deliberate, methodical, and at times commercially challenging journey away from the colossal shadow of the Zeppelin. He steadfastly refused to become a museum piece, a nostalgia act peddling past glories. He rejected countless, almost unimaginably lucrative offers for reunions that, in his view, would have been a betrayal of the band's innovative spirit and a gross exploitation of his own artistic integrity. He viewed the endless repetition of the past as a form of artistic prostitution, a creative stagnation that his restless and deeply wounded soul could not tolerate. He had to keep moving forward, simply to keep from going mad. Musically, this quest for a new identity was a fascinating and courageous odyssey. He consciously uncoupled himself from hard rock, immersing himself in subtler, more contemporary sounds. His first solo albums, Pictures at 11, 1982, and The Principle of Moments, 1983, embraced the synthesizers and polished textures of the new wave, a deliberate and stark departure from the monolithic guitar riffs that were Zeppelin's lingua franca. This was a risky, polarizing move that alienated a significant portion of his old fan base, but it was an essential declaration of independence. His voice, too, had irreversibly changed. Years of punishing, high-intensity performances, combined with a minor throat surgery in 1974, had taken their physical toll. He no longer possessed the same stratospheric range and seemingly inexhaustible youthful power, but what he had lost in sheer altitude, he gained in texture, depth, nuance, and wisdom. His vocal technique became more restrained, more mature. He learned to use economy as a tool, to suggest power rather than merely project it, to find the deepest emotion in the quiet spaces and subtle inflections of a melody. He learned to sing not as a god, but as a man. This sonic exploration led him down unexpected geographical and musical paths, far beyond the familiar Anglo-American rock axis. He plunged deeply into the music of North Africa and the Middle East, becoming fascinated by their modal scales, sinuous melodies, and complex, interlocking rhythms. This influence is clearly audible in his mid-90s collaboration with Page No Quarter, Unleaded, and throughout his work with his band Strange Sensation. He rediscovered the rich, intricate tapestry of the British folk revival, reconnecting with the acoustic roots that had first blossomed on Led Zeppelin III. Then, in one of the most surprising and artistically successful rebirths in music history, he turned his attention to American roots music, bluegrass, gothic country, and rockabilly. The sublime apex of this immersion was Raising Sand, 2007, his spellbinding collaboration with bluegrass virtuoso Alison Krauss. On that record, Plant sheds every last vestige of his rock god past. His voice, now a warm, seasoned baritone, intertwines with Krauss's ethereal soprano in gossamer fine harmonies, demonstrating a level of restraint and subtle sensitivity that many never knew he possessed. The album's phenomenal critical and commercial success, including a sweep of the Grammy Awards, solidified his identity not as a former rock icon, but as a vital, curious, and constantly mutating artist. Every subsequent project, whether with the Band of Joy or the sensational Space Shifters, was another determined step away from the ghost of the Golden God. He no longer wanted to sing about Valhalla. He wanted to sing about life, loss, desire, and love, from the weathered perspective of a man who had lived intensely and survived unspeakable pain. He became a musical archaeologist, excavating ancient traditions not to replicate them, but to find within them a new voice, a new and resonant truth about himself. Therefore, the untold story, the fundamental truth that Robert Plant might prefer to remain veiled, is not about the sordid secrets of rock and roll, which are frankly predictable, tedious, and universally known. It is the story of a brutal, involuntary metamorphosis, forged in the unforgiving fire of the deepest tragedy a human can experience. What he would hate for us to know is the sheer depth of his brokenness, how perilously close he came to total annihilation, and how that profound pain became the unwilling catalyst for his complete reinvention. He rightfully resists being seen as a victim or a tragic figure. He wants and has earned the right to be seen as a musician in constant, restless evolution. But the undeniable truth is that one does not exist without the other. The loss of his son and the subsequent collapse of his world were not just events in his life. They were the crucible that burned the persona of the Golden God down to ash. And it was only from those ashes that the true artist could be reborn. Without the fall from Olympus, Robert Plant could easily have become a gilded caricature of himself, a prisoner of his own colossal legacy, doomed to sing Stairway to Heaven in stadiums until his voice gave out. Instead, unimaginable pain forced him on an inward journey that resulted in one of the richest, bravest, and most moving second acts in music history. He had to destroy the myth to save the man, and in saving the man, he found something far rarer and more enduring than fame, an artistic authenticity that continues to burn intensely, no longer with the furious, explosive rage of a supernova, but with the steady, wise, and knowing glow of a distant star, a star laden with history, with grief, and with the melancholy beauty of one who has walked through hell and returned to tell the tale, not with a battle cry, but with a song. The true hidden story is that of a survivor who learned to transform the sound of mourning into the purest, most resilient, and most beautiful act of creation.